So Raven dropped the full patch notes for its mid-season update for Season 3, and whoa man is it a big one. It's Robman here folks, and in this video we'll check out the weapon rebalance and see where the weapon pool is at after all the buffs and nerfs are taken into account. And you'll definitely want to stick around to the end because I think there just may be a long time ignored Modern Warfare option that might be sneaking into the meta. I do want to say as well, just before I begin, I'm going to be throwing a lot of info on the screen and I'll be covering it pretty quickly just to keep them moving along at a decent pace, so try and stay with me. Alright, so broadly speaking, the weapon rebalance basically continued nerfing Modern Warfare and Cold War era weapons while buffing the Vanguard arsenal. Let's start out with what got nerfed, then we'll move on to the buffs. The CR56 AMAX. The AMAX was basically nerfed straight into the ground this go around. Max damage is now down to 31 from 35 and minimum damage 24 from 31. The Cold War AK-47 received another slight nerf to the neck damage multiplier, while the FAR's minimum damage was decreased to 22 from 23. The XM4 also saw another round of nerfs with max damage range, and neck damage multiplier all being decreased right alongside a slight nerf to the C58's neck damage multiplier. On the sniper front, the HDR now has increased bullet drop, making it more challenging to hit shots at range. The AX50's bullet velocity dropped by just over 5%, which is surprising as I always found it to be a bit slow to begin with. The Cold War Pellington saw its damage fall, while the ZRG saw its upper torso damage multiplier being decreased quite a bit, and a pretty hefty bullet velocity nerf to the 43.9-inch barrel. Overall, shotguns took a pretty major hit this go around as well, with the Street Sweeper, Gallo, Jack 12, Origin, R90, and even the Vanguard's Gracie Auto receiving a big 20% nerf to damage output. This change was meant to address that raw TTK times were largely unaffected when the base health was changed to 150 and with plates 300. The story's the same with Modern Warfare and Cold War SMGs. The Milano received a major nerf with the mid-range damage tier being added into the mix. The Lapa saw major nerfs in both damage output and damage range across the board. The OTS was slightly nerfed, and the MW AUG, a sleeping tiger in my opinion, got its 5.56 ammo conversion nerfed slightly on damage output and quite a bit on the range. Surprisingly, Vanguard's Wellgun also saw a nerf with the popular 120mm short barrel seeing its fire rate decreasing, although that is offset a bit through the removed damage range penalty overall. The Owen gun saw some slight damage range, and fire rate nerfs, but I think they've done an alright job here. At first glance, it looks like the Owen will remain a pretty good choice in the SMG category, but won't feel as OP as it has to date. As far as the pistol category goes, the major nerf here is the new requirement to get 3 successive melee attacks with a pistol just to down an enemy. Prior to the change, 3 melees were also necessary, but it didn't need to be immediately after one another. In my opinion, this is a pretty big change that could affect the speed of hot drops right at the beginning of the game. I also wonder if the Diamante has also been significantly nerfed. We'll have to see how the Vanguard machine pistol stacks up with it being buffed in this rebalance, but we'll touch on that in a little bit. So to sum it up on what's been nerfed, you're definitely going to want to stop using the AMAX and automatic shotgun options. You're also going to want to take a second thought on the Milano, Cold War AK-47, and the XM4. I don't think they've nerfed them to the ground, but they're not going to be what they once were. And hot drops will be a little bit slower with pistol melees being slightly nerfed. So folks, before we move on to the weapon buffs, let me know what you think of the weapon nerfs down in the comments below. And if you haven't already, hit that button in the bottom right hand corner to subscribe now if you enjoy the content. Alright, so getting into the buffs, I want to lead off again with the assault rifle class and specifically the AS-44. Its initial recoil was slightly decreased and its bullet velocity increased. This is important to note because I just broke down the AS-44 pre-buff and I deemed it to be a top tier option except for an initial recoil that was challenging to control. I'm looking forward to looking at this again because it had one of the highest TTKs and a very forgiving fire rate. The BAR got a pretty large buff to its headshot multiplier and some pretty substantial buffs to its magazine sizes as well. Specifically, the 40 round 50 BMG mag now holds 60 rounds with the fire rate increasing as well. I'm looking forward to seeing how this plays out once I get a chance to look at the new TTKs to see where it lies in the new meta. The NZ41 is finally seeing some love from Raven, and honestly, it's a gun I really enjoy playing with in multiplayer. In a fast TTK environment, its first few shots has zero recoil, but then would go into a berserk side-to-side bounce that was completely uncontrollable over the life of the magazine. There's quite a few changes here across the barrels, but broadly speaking, horizontal recoil, damage, and damage range have all received major buffs. So the Cooper Carbine received an increase to its bullet velocity, while the Nikita now has an easier recoil pattern with a slightly slower sprint to fire time. The Itra Burst, something we don't see very often, saw its headshot multiplier go up with a few buffs to the 303 British 36 round mags. The Vargo 52 saw a slight damage increase, and the Volkssturmgewehr saw head and neck damage increases alongside a moderately reduced ADS movement speed. Moving on to the SMG class, the Armaguerra receives an overall net buff here with a slight reduction to its initial recoil and the 350mm barrel's vertical recoil multiplier. The buff to the 34 round mag is slight, and most folks are going to go with the larger capacity mag anyway, so I don't see the overall gun changing that much. And of course, on the new Cold War UGR, the mag size is now up to 40 from 30 pre-buff. On the pistol front, I do want to touch upon the machine pistol here as far as buffs go. For anyone who's tried it in Warzone, wow, this thing is unusable. Ravens obviously acknowledge this as they buff damage it right across the board while significantly reducing its overall recoil. I'm not a big fan of OP handguns, and I'm thinking pre-nerf MW Snake Shot Magnums or Diamatis, but on paper this is a great change that just might make this whole thing viable. As for the other pistols, the main story here is increased damage for Vanguard's 1911, Klauser, and RATT. Moving on to Vanguard Marksman rifle buffs, damage and bullet velocity increases have been applied right across the range to the SVT-40, M1916, and M1 Garand. Despite these changes, at first blush, I don't think this will affect the overall viability of the Vanguard Marksman rifle class until recoil and or visual recoil is reduced further. Sniper rifles saw a few buffs across the range, with most of the attention given to the Vanguard's 3-line rifle, Kar 98K, Type 99, and Gorenko. I'm going to fly through these pretty quickly in that no substantive changes here are being made considering the major sniper nerf from a few weeks ago. It's more of some positive tweaks right across the range that should make each of the weapons more usable, but doesn't drastically change the function of the sniper class relative to the other classes. Now a few highlights. The Modern Warfare Dragunov saw an odd buff to its max damage range, as did the Rytek AMR. The Rytek can now get one-shot kills to the head while also dealing out increased damage. Similar changes were made to the Cold War M82 as well, which makes sense as both the M82 and Rytek are very similar in many ways. Now moving over to the shotgun class, the only shotgun to see a buff is the Vanguard Combat Shotgun, and it receives some pretty hefty buffs at that. I would still tend to avoid shotguns unless in a quad or something, where each member has a specialized loadout. They are still a very niche weapon and not really conducive to how the mostly outdoor and longer range engagements play out on Caldera. So to sum up the buffs at large, I'd have to say check out the AS44 if you haven't already. The NZ41 is something I'll be looking at personally, and I'm going to give the machine pistol another try. As for the new H4 Blixen, I'll get that breakdown up and running for you as fast as possible, so if you haven't already, hit that button in the bottom right hand corner now to subscribe to the channel. Now, as with any weapon rebalance with a pool of close to 200 options, there's always going to be those that rise to the top naturally as the meta shifts. One that frankly has never been close to the top tier level, but in my opinion is quickly making its way forward, is the Modern Warfare AK-47. I haven't done a full breakdown or review of its stats relative to others since the nerf, but I noticed in the last couple of days its TTKs are just slightly behind the top tier meta SDG builds. And I've played a few matches with it and its mobility is definitely alright, even with the 75 round mags. So have a look at the MW AK-47, let me know what you think in the comments below. So that pretty much wraps up today's video. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Season 3 Reloaded weapon rebalancing and whether you agree or disagree with the changes. Let me know down in the comments. Thanks again for stopping by the channel, and with that, it's time to sign off. Robman out. Cheers.